Everyone, welcome to another session of our Azure Community Series. And today with me is Samuel Mudupe, the cybersecurity expert, and we'll be walking through the topic securing your Azure network. So if you have always found that confusing or a difficult task to do, well, you'll be guiding us through that process today. So I hope you sit to the end of the session and enjoy it and learn something impactful. Hi, Samuel. It's nice to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you, Damilola. Nice to
You're welcome.
meet you.
All right, so I'm sure that our listeners, community members are ready to hear what you have for us today. So I'll let you get right into it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Damilola. It's indeed an opportunity to share thoughts and contribute to the community. I'll be sharing my screen now to share. Okay, so the topic is implementing network security in Azure. My name is Samuel Modupe. So, just a bit of introduction about me. So, I'm a cybersecurity expert with about a decade years of experience in cybersecurity and engineering. And my expertise include designing and implementing robust security solutions to be able to mitigate risks and protect organizations from cyber threats. And I have some globally recognized certifications like CISSP, CISM, CCNP Security, Ethical Hacker, and some expert level certifications with Microsoft Azure. And my LinkedIn profile, I would love to connect with me. Okay, so to the business of the day, I'll be breaking this session into three major areas. So, apart from the introduction, for as many who are new to network security, I'll provide a bit of foundation. And looking at the business of the day is looking at implementing network security from a virtual network aspect. We look at it from a private access and also from a public access. Then lastly, I'll walk you through a standard network security architecture which you can actually implement within your organization or your cloud tenant. Okay, so network security. We can't talk about network security without first of all talking about what is a network. And a network is a connection of two or more devices or computers to share resources. When you have resources that are meant to be shared and you're able to connect two or more computers, then you've built a network. But network security is you now protecting that network that has resources that are being shared from unauthorized access, misuse, and theft. And it's quite one of the cardinal aspects of cybersecurity today. You can't talk about cybersecurity without talking about network security. And malicious actors or unauthorized users are blocked or not giving access to those resources. The first is securing virtual networks. Within Azure, there's a network which is called a virtual network. As you know, the cloud is built on virtualization, and everything you have in Azure is virtualized. So even your network, it's not the physical network you have in your organization or your on-prem or in your home or office. But in Azure, we have what we call a virtual network because it's virtualized, and it is the fundamental building blocks of private networks in Azure. Now, this is the aspect of Azure that you deploy your resources into. So your resources, such as your infrastructure as a service like VMs, are able to talk to each other. Your platform as a service can talk to each other using or leveraging on a virtual network. And whether your resources, whether you're connecting from the internet, you're connecting from on-prem, or you're connecting from another tenant, you would have to leverage the Azure Virtual Network. And these are some of the use cases. One of the use case is you have resources hosted in Azure and you need someone from the internet to talk to them. Maybe you've hosted a web service, a web application on a server, and you need people across the globe to be able to reach it. So this is a use case of a virtual network where you have what we call a public IP, an IP where publicly you can access over the internet, and there are concepts like NATing that makes that possible. Then you also have communication between Azure resources. So you might have app services, Azure Kubernetes services. You could have virtual machines that need to talk to each other. You would definitely need to leverage on the virtual network. You could have service endpoints. You could have a whole lot of resources within Azure talking to each other. They would need to sit on the virtual network. You could also communicate with on-prem resources outside Azure, connecting to Azure from a trusted location like your office, or maybe someone from home. You could have like a site-to-site VPN, a point-to-site VPN. We'll break this down even as we proceed. You could also look at filtering your traffic in terms of what traffic goes into Azure and what traffic exits. And you also have routing, how the traffic is directed, and also when you integrate it with Azure services. So this is just a diagrammatic representation of what a virtual network is within Azure. And you have what is called subnets. Subnets are smaller chunks or smaller segments of a virtual network. Now, what are the technologies that you can use to secure your virtual network? So you've deployed the virtual network in your infrastructure, in your Azure tenant. Now, how do you secure it? One of the cloud native technologies that Azure has is what we call the NSG and the ESG, the Network Security Group and the Application Security Group. Now, the network security group is typically what we call like a distributed firewall. So it's a firewall that can either sit at the NIC level, the network interface level of your Azure resource, or it can sit at the subnet level of your Azure resources. So you're able to filter what goes in and what goes out of your infrastructure, what goes out of your Azure resources. So you're able to permit or deny. And you can permit using what we call the five tuple, your source, who's connecting, the source port, the destination port, and also the protocol, whether it is TCP or UDP. Now, the second one is the application security group, which is quite more granular. So, where in a network you have web servers, you have database servers, and they are seated in the same virtual network or even in the same subnet, and you logically want to separate it. The application security group can help you group those services or those Azure resources where even though they are in the same subnet, you will be able to control how they talk to each other. And this is a typical illustration of what it is from a virtual network point of view. Now, for network security group, which is NSG, you have things like a virtual machine VM1 to 4. You can apply the NSG at the NIC level, which you have the NSG2. You can apply it at the subnet level, which you have NSG2, NSG1. So you can see that the NSG2 is both at the NIC level. And you could have actually VMs where you don't apply NSG. But with the NSG, you can filter what comes in and what goes out. Now, looking at the application security group, the ASG, the ASG leverages or sits on top of the NSG, where you can actually group the resources into based on their services. So you could have an ASG for web services. So like VM1 and VM2 are web servers, and you can actually group it and define the permissions that will come in or go out of the web services or web servers. You could actually group a server as a logic, ASG logic for your logic, and you could also group a server as a DB. So you'll be able to control them whether they are both in the same subnet, which is under a virtual network, or they are within the same virtual network. So that's one of the security and network security technologies you can implement for your virtual network. Another one is what we call the user-defined routes. So for some of you who have done it, you have a routing table which is called the UDR, the user defined routes or route tables, where you can actually define how traffic would flow within your Azure virtual network. So you can tell how the traffic from your virtual machines or for your services, Azure services, how they can talk to each other or how they can talk to an external party. And this comes in very handy where all you've hosted in Azure would typically have direct internet access. But for security, you shouldn't put everything on the internet. You need to make some things internal. You need to make some things in an isolated environment. You need to make some things even facing internet, like what we call a DMZ. So within Azure, you can use an UDR to be able to define and dictate how traffic flows within Azure. So another concept or that fits into network security within a virtual network is what we call a virtual network peering or gateway. By design, in Azure, each virtual network is isolated. So when you have multiple virtual networks, they're isolated. Now, for you to have resources in one virtual network, talk to resources in another virtual network, you have to do what we call peering, virtual network peering. So this is where you'll be able to actually link both virtual networks together so that you can actually communicate with each other. And you have instances of VPN gateways where you can maybe have resources on-prem and you need them to talk to your resources in Azure. You can create a VPN gateway which is able to send traffic between your virtual network in Azure and your on-premise location over the internet through a secure channel. Another technology that would also help you within your virtual networks is what we call a virtual private network, a VPN, which can come in terms of a point to site or a site to site VPN. A site to site VPN is what you typically do with your on premise. You have a router, a firewall on prem, and you need resources on prem to talk to resources in Azure. You'll be able to set up a site to site VPN, which is leveraging on IPsec or IKE, Internet Key Encryption technologies, to be able to give an encrypted connection over the public internet. So this is where site-to-site VPN comes in. We also have what we call the point-to-site. So the point-to-site sits like a remote access VPN, where from your PC you can remotely connect directly to Azure rather than going through a jump server like Azure Bastion or going through a virtual machine. You can actually connect directly to Azure using what we call the point to site, just the way you do your remote access VPN to your corporate network today. So you can set up that even with your Windows 10 or Windows 11. You can natively set up a VPN client to Azure that can connect to it. Now, this is an illustration of how it looks. So for site-to-site VPN, you have Azure here, you have your on-premises here. For Azure, you have two virtual networks, number of virtual networks you have, and they are hosted in East US, which is the region where it's hosted. You have VNet one, and you have this subnet actually. So you have what we call the virtual network gateway. Can do a remote, you can do a site whether at the HQ or at the DR. Whether your data center is seated in your headquarter or is seated in your DR, you're able to do a site-to-site VPN for both end and would allow encrypted connection over the internet or private connection over the internet using IPsec. You could also have site to site, which in this scenario, you have your PCs, you have roaming clients, or you have people across the world that needs direct access to your virtual network. They can leverage this by doing a point to site VPN with your VPN gateway in Azure. Now, that's over the internet. Now, you can also choose to use what we call an express route. An express route is a leased line where you have direct connection with Azure without going through the internet. And even though it's more expensive, it provides you more bandwidth, more speed when it comes to connection. So you have your on-prem location connecting to Microsoft Cloud or Azure through a private network. So you could have a provider, maybe your ISP, will be able to provide you what we call a circuit between your on-prem and Azure. And you'll be able to consume Azure resources as though you are connecting to a data center beside you, a data center within your geographical location. Microsoft services like going through the internet express route. So it gives you faster speed, consistent latency, and you also have higher security because it's a dedicated connection you have to your resources in Azure. Okay, so this is a typical example and illustration of it. You have your customer network here, and you have a router or a firewall, whichever one, which sits as your partner edge, which we call the customer edge CP, customer edge device. Then you have the Express Route circuit to Microsoft Edge, wherever they are, maybe South Africa, wherever you are, they'll be able to terminate that connection. And you have that dedicated connection where you consume Microsoft 365 resources or have access to your virtual network. Okay, so now how do you aggregate this together? A question might come to mind that, okay, I have point to site, I have site to site, I have express route. How do I aggregate all of them together? Some might even say, I'm choosing to use express route as my primary connection. And if express route goes down, how do I switch over to site to site? Now, that is what Azure Virtual WAN does for you. It's more like the aggregation point where you can have all multiple connections aggregated at a point in time, and based on policies, you can choose which to use, whether it is site to site remote access, whether it is express routes, whether it is VPN, whatever one you're able to do that. And this is a typical example of it here. So you have your Azure Virtual WAN where you have an express route connection to Azure here, which from your data center or headquarter. From your branches, you can have the technology which we call SD-WAN, software defined wide area network. You could actually connect it directly through your branches. You could have site to site, point to site, where you have a remote access user, whether from their Mac, their Android device, their Windows devices, or Linux device connect. You could also have site to site VPN connections to this. Now, the virtual one will aggregate all of these things so that you can access all of your resources in Azure. Now, having deployed all of these security, network security technologies in Azure to protect it, when it comes to troubleshooting, when it comes to monitoring, Azure has a feature called Azure Network Watcher. Network Watcher. The Network Watcher gives a suite of tools that allows you to monitor, diagnose, and also have visibility into all your network connections. Because when there are issues, you need to troubleshoot. The Network Watcher has tools that can assist you with that troubleshooting. And these are some of the tools for monitoring. You have a connection monitor. You could also even plot out a topology of your network. You have things like NSG diagnostics, where you check your effective security rules, where you troubleshoot your VPN. You could also do packet capture. You could also even do flow logs, and you could do traffic analysis. So the network watcher provides that visibility for you to be able to troubleshoot and deal with any network issues or network security issues you have in Azure. Now, look, we will now go to the second section. Just to reiterate, so the first section we looked at was how to secure your virtual networks because those sit as a fundamental key backbone of network in Azure. And we looked at NSG, ESG, looked at site-to-site VPN, network peer, virtual network peering, and so on. But you also have instances where within Azure, how do you protect resources? You get where you have what we call a private access. You might have platform as a services, platform as a service in Azure, and you need to be able to ensure secure connection between services and infrastructure within Azure. And that's what we call the secure private access. So, at the secure private access, you need to understand that there is what we call a service endpoint, where you could actually have services defined as endpoints. So without having IP addresses, you're able to connect to them. So you can have maybe your storage, Azure storage, having a service where you can call them from a virtual network. So service endpoints enables private IP addresses to be able to reach endpoints in Azure without having to go through the internet. You're able to go through Azure Backbone Network, and some of the benefits include improved security, where for some of your services, you don't need to route them through the public internet. You can actually connect to them from your virtual network, and also allows for optimal routing because this is traffic that happens within Azure and you don't have to send it over an external network. You also have less management overhead where you wouldn't have to maintain public IP addresses for these services and do a bit of NATing or gateway, um, deploy gateway. So service endpoint is a future, is a technology in Azure that you can leverage for some of your services. And this is a typical example of it. So you have your on-prem and you have peering going to it. And in this instance, you have a storage account here, and you need to connect to that storage account. So rather than having to go through the internet, your virtual machine can actually connect to your storage account using what we call a service endpoint. And even your on-prem can connect to those to that particular storage account using service endpoint in Azure. So that's what it gives you without having to go through the internet to consume these resources. Okay, so there's also what we call private endpoints. Now, private endpoint is where you need to have an IP address on this service. For some reason, you want to have an IP address tied to it. Now, that's what you call a private endpoint. So you're not comfortable with having a URL, having a URL to connect to these services. You can go the route of what we call a private endpoint, and you can use the DNS, Azure DNS, and to be able to map the service to a private IP. So you can connect to Azure storage or storage account using a private IP, whether it's Cosmos DB, Azure SQL, or whatever service that you built, and you will have um, like your NSG, your UDR, your ESG protected. You can define security policies because you have them as private endpoints. Now, looking at Azure App Services, which are some of the private services you have in Azure, you can, whatever variation of app service, whether it's dedicated or you're using an app service environment and ASE environment, you can actually ensure security using NSG, using UDR, and also in that gateway, where you can secure, um, protect this access to these particular services. Okay, so that's for private access. Now let's look at public access, where how you connect to these services from the public or from the internet. Okay, so the first is encryption accounts is data secure. It has my data secure. Now, you need to know that within Azure, it has some native encryption technologies that can help you secure your data at rest, your data in transit, even within Azure. So for data at rest, you're able to protect your data in Azure, whether through a client-side encryption, which is outside Azure, or through a server-side encryption, which is within Azure. And for a server-side encryption, you can use service managed keys, where within Azure you can ensure that Azure manages the keys for you. It can be customer managed where you manage the keys, or it can be service managed keys with your hardware where you actually host your own key within your environment, your on-prem environment. You also have Azure Disk Encryption, where you're able to encrypt the disks, whether it's a Linux or a Windows virtual machine. You also have storage service encryption, whether it's your blob storage or your shared files, you can encrypt it. You could also do transparent data encryption, where you encrypt your SQL server and your database, your wherever your data is, whatever form of database you're using, you're able to encrypt it. So you could also encrypt data in transit, which is in motion. So you can leverage on TLS, where you protect this data that is transiting from or to your cloud, where you enforce strong authentication, message privacy, and integrity, and using HTTPS technologies on this. And there are also other encryption in transit technologies like SMB version 3.0, which Azure File Shares supports. And you also have secure RDP session, SSH, which is encrypted, and also your site-to-site VPN and your point-to-site VPN to be able to ensure that whatever data leaves your Azure tenant is encrypted. So these are some of the technologies you can implement. Now you also have what we call the Azure Firewall, which is a next-gen firewall that can help you protect your network either from the internet or within. So you could have services or people consuming services from the internet. You can use your Azure Firewall to protect it. You could also have services connecting from one subnet to another. You'll be able to protect it, maybe from your database to your application, or from your web application uh, um, to your logic application. You're able to protect it in a secure manner. And there's also what we call the Azure Virtual Firewall Manager, where you're able to centralize all of this and define policies from a central location. Now, this is a typical example. Yeah. So in most instances where you deploy a firewall, you use what we call a hub and spoke architecture. A hub and spoke architecture where you have resources, could be production virtual network, you could have data test environment. So and you need all of them to be able to talk to each other or talk to resources outside Azure. Now you can centralize that in a hub where you deploy your virtual firewall, which is the Azure firewall, and you're able to protect resources that are coming in and out, whether north to south going out or east to west going from one um, network segment of your network to another segment of your network. And you're able to get TLS inspection or what we call SSL inspection. You're able to do intrusion detection and prevention. You're able to do URL filtering. You're able to also do content filtering using web categories. And you could actually secure connectivity with your on-prem using the Azure firewall. Okay, so this is also an example where you have multiple firewalls and you need to be able to secure them. Where you have, for instance, even across regions, you could have possibly you have a data center in maybe East US and have another data center in West US across different regions. So with the Azure Firewall, you can protect each of those regions and also manage them from the Azure Firewall. Okay, so another native network security tool you have in Azure is what we call the Azure Application Gateway, which sits as both a load balancer and a web application firewall. So it's able to help you load balance traffic where you might have what we call a backend pool of resources that you need to consume, or you need services to be consumed from it. So Azure Application Gateway can actually help you load balance them. And this is a typical example where you have users coming to contours or your website and they go through the application gateway, and you can specify that if they were going to the images section, they go and visit, they are directed to a set of resources. If they are going to the video section, they are going to a set of resources, and you're able to do um, load balancing, and you're also able to do web application firewall, where you protect those web facing or internet facing resources from attacks such as SQL injections, cross-site scripting, etc., etc. You're able to do that capability with the Azure application gateway. And this is a typical example of it, using that illustration where when people are doing SQL injection to your website or to your web service, you're able to block it. Whether it's caused by script, you're able to block it, and you only allow the clean traffic, the traffic that is meant for your services to go through. So you also have some other services like Azure Front Door, when you want to leverage what we call a CDN, a content delivery network, where you can have caches of your website across the globe to be able to improve performance. So let's say you've hosted a web server in a region, let's say East US. I want people in Nigeria, people in Europe, people in Asia to be able to access it seamlessly. You can leverage Azure global Microsoft Global Network with what we call point of presence, where rather than them being routed all the way to East US or West US where you have hosted it, they can consume those services from the closest point of presence near them. So this is the CDN capability of Azure Fondo, and the Fondo gives you that improved performance to your resources. And this is a typical example of them illustrating it, where, for instance, you have your on-prem, you need to connect to your services, you're able to come to Azure Front Door, which also has a web application firewall features, or you're actually connecting from any other part of the world. You're able to come in through Azure Global, Microsoft Global Network for improved performance. Another technology that can help you for public access, protect your resources from public access, is what we call the Azure DDoS protection, which is distributed denial of service protection. Whenever you host resources on the internet, there are people who want to bring down that service, who want to make it unavailable to legitimate users. Now, Azure has the distributed denial of service protection, where you're able to protect those services from attack. Where when someone is sending illegitimate traffic, Azure will be able to hold that traffic and provide only the traffic that is needed to your resources, thereby improving availability of your resources over the internet. This is a typical example of it. So you have your DDoS protection, which sits here, and you have your application gateway, which does your WAF and your application gateway, and whatever services, whether it's your app services you're using or your Azure SQL database, your DDoS protection is able to protect internet access to those particular services. So that just wraps us for public access. And the last we'll do here is just walk you through an architecture of putting everything together. Apologies, the image is a bit blurry. I couldn't get a clearer one, but the image typifies bringing all of these technologies together. So let me walk you through. So you have here, which is your internet, and you could have um, two regions. You're using region. So region A, which might be um, East US, it might be region B, which might be West US, for instance. And you've actually done a duplication of whatever you have in your primary data center, which is region A, and your secondary data center, which is region B. Now, you have from the on-prem, yeah, so you have your on-prem resources connecting to it using express routes. So express route allows you to be able to connect directly using a lease line to your resources wherever they are within Azure network. So you'll be able to connect directly to it. You could also use site-to-site VPN with your VPN gateway. So your site-to-site VPN using your VPN gateway on-prem, which could be a firewall or a router. You do a site-to-site VPN using IPsec to it. You could do a point to site. Point to site is you using your PC, whether it's Windows 10, Windows 11, or Mac, and you connect directly to Azure. So this can happen either in the primary data center in region A or in your secondary center data center in region B. So you see a duplicate of this here and also this here. Now, you also have your DDoS protection. So your DDoS protection is able to protect you from everything coming from the internet. Anything coming from the internet, you're able to go through your DDoS protection before they hit the Azure Internet Gateway, which is the internet facing end of Azure. So your DDoS protection sits there. You have your traffic manager or front door, which allows you to be able to route traffic. If maybe region A or East US goes down, you are able to direct traffic to region B. So Azure Traffic Manager allows you to be able to do that at the global level, of Azure globally. So let me now use just this region, because what you have and the primary region, which is region A or East US, is what you have in the secondary region, which is the West region here. Okay, so you see at the virtual network level, you have the express route gateway, which the express route connects to. You have the VPN gateway, which you spoke about, that allows you to connect site to site VPN and point to site VPN. And you have the Azure Internet Gateway, which by default is there, that allows you to connect to the internet. Okay, so now first you need to have in this virtual network. So this just signifies a virtual network within a subscription. So there's a subscription here and there's a subscription here. So you see that both of them are in the same subscription, but actually we've actually deployed resources in different regions. So you have a resource group here, which is a virtual network, which is in a virtual network, which is your hub. And your hub, you have your jump box or your management subnet where you have your Azure board bastion. You can host your Azure bastion here. You could have your Active Directory here, which allows you to govern Active Directory. So you have shared services like your DNS, your Active Directory, your proxy. You have that here. Then you also have other shared services like your load balancer, your network access control, like which is your NSG, you where they are hosted. You have your firewall and you also have your NAT. So this sits at the hub. Then you have a VNet for production. You have a VNet for non-prod or non-production, which is your test. Now, on the prod, you have your virtual machines, your load balancers. Now, and if you're doing a three-tier application architecture where you have the front end or the web tier, you have the middle end, which is your business or application tier, and you have the back end, which is your database tier. So you can actually logically separate each of them using application security group. You can separate your front end from your application and from your database or backend. Yeah. So as you can see, they are grouped here with your VM, your load balancer, and based on the group, security group. You also have your backend where you have some services, and in your backend you have your database and storage services here. So you see them here, and you're able to have them in. You could put them in different subnets, or you could have them in one subnet and use an ASG to separate them. Now, within Azure, you can access these things or have visibility across board using a dashboard. You could also, that's the Azure portal, you could view, you could use or leverage Azure Monitor to be able to have application insights, monitoring solution metrics. You could also do identity and asset management using your Microsoft Entra. You also have Event Hubs, Power BI, log analytics for logs. And you have also APIs that allows you for auto scale. Now, when you pair two different virtual networks together, it's called a global VNet pairing. So with this, you can pair or have that logical connection between your primary data center and your secondary data center, or your DC and your DR. So this just explains and puts all of these network security technologies in one pane of glass. Then, for references, Microsoft Net has a lot of resources that can assist you to understand how to secure your virtual networks. So you could go through this. You could also learn about how to do private access to all your resources within Azure. You could also learn about public access. And this is just a documentation on if you are new to network security. Okay, thank you very much. I'll be opening the floor for question and answers. I don't know if you have any question for me. Hi, Dami. Okay, so and if you send, you can use the chat to put in your question. Do you have any question? Okay, nice session. Okay, visibility. Sorry, I'm not seeing your chat. Please maximize the screen you're using for the slides. Okay, thank you, Abby. I don't know if there's any other one. Any question? Okay, thank you, everyone. I appears the. I don't know if there are any question. Hi, Damilola. Welcome back. I can't hear you. Can you hear me, Dami? Lola? Okay. Yeah, I
Hi,
think we can
Samuel.
hear you now. Yeah, I can hear you now.
I'm so sorry about that. I
No
don't know, it
problem.
wasn't just on muting. Yeah, so thank you so much for this session. I want to apologize to everyone that they were not able to see the screen, but I think what I'll do is I'll have someone share the slides, please, so that we
Okay.
can just review it from now on. Thank you so much, Samuel, for the insightful session on networking. Anyone who has questions, please feel free to reach out to him. You can reach out. I don't know if it's okay to reach out on LinkedIn, but I mean, if you have any questions, you can leave it here. And if we don't answer it, I'll do a compilation and get back to everyone. Thank you so much for staying to the end. And thank you, Samuel, for coming today. Really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing
Thank
everyone
you,
next week at our Global Azure Bootcamp. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Cheers.